All right, guys, we're here with a battle report, our first battle report. I'm Jake, and I'm here with James. We're from the Rose City Dukes and Justices Gaming Club in Portland, Oregon. And we have the Battle of Prokhorovka. This is an event that James ran at Ambuscade 2019.
Yep, so this is James, and on April 6th, 2019, a friend of ours, Spencer, put together this huge gaming event in Portland, Oregon, at one of our friendly local gaming stores, Guardian Games, and we took that as an opportunity to have a large tank battle. The Battle of Prokhorovka on the 12th of July, 1943, was actually mixed infantry, armor, and guns, but we stripped that away just so we have the tanks part of the battle. But then we tweaked it a lot to get the flavor of the battle.
Right.
A couple things that we introduced were the tank wave for the Russians, and that gives the Germans and the Russians the impression of tank brigade after tank brigade of rolling over the hills and through the fields, coming at the Germans and just pounding them. The Germans will end up being greatly outnumbered as more of these tanks come on the battlefield. And then we had wreck markers that we constructed for this battle to show the smoke and also introduce a special rule that kind of gives more of the flavor of how the battle went.
Right.
So you want to talk about the tank graveyard
Yeah,
rule?
the tank graveyard rule, which I thought was really interesting. When you have three wrecked vehicles within a certain distance of your tanks being shot at, you can try and use the mistaken target rule and swap hits onto the wrecks and save your own tanks, which is a cool idea. Didn't quite get used as much as it probably should have, but it's a little bit, I guess, difficult. I get into a mindset when I play Flames of War of what the standard rules are and focus so much on that. I tend to, at the time, I didn't realize the certain opportunities that I could have been using it, but we'll get into that as we go through the video. So let's check out how we start to deploy. We've got myself on the upper left-hand side, on the Russian side, the far side of the table. We have Nick in the center, and we have Jeffrey on the upper right playing Soviets. Town in the center is representing Prokhorovka, and then on the bottom side of the table, just two German players, Ryan in the bottom left and Tom in the bottom right. And they'll mostly be using a mix of Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs.
Panzer IVs, yep.
Now, did the Panzer IIIs have any? None of them were front armor 5. They were up armored and late Panzer IIIs because of this scenario, right?
There were actually a mix of Panzer IIIs. Tom had the 1943 Tank Company mix of Panzer IVs and up armored late Panzer IIIs. Ryan had the 42 versions from Iron Cross.
Okay.
That have the front armor 5 in many cases, but they have the Panzer IIIs also in each of those companies have the long guns. So everybody's got long guns on the German side.
Right. So here we're doing deployment. Jeffrey will have a mix of T-34s and some T-70s.
Yes.
Nick will have Valentines and 2 groups of T-34s.
Yes.
And I have KVs, 3 KVs, and 2 groups of T-34s. I have some armored car recon and a Sturmovik with the upgrade card that lets their skill go from 5 to 3, which is nice. And you see, I've forward deployed using the spearhead move, which is typically a really good thing to do in a normal game, but I think in this case it may have been a little bit of a hindrance because the Russian tanks wouldn't be crashing into the Germans all at the same time. I'd be a lot further forward. Well, the flanks would be a lot further forward than Nick in the middle.
Right.
So we'll see. Germans haven't even started. Well, they've got, looks like they've got 2 tanks in a wheat field so far, and I don't even know if they were just set there on the table or if that's actual deployment.
Yeah. So as far as the terrain goes, we play tested this on a smaller board, and we found that with the German long guns, if there was not a lot of concealing terrain, the Soviet tanks would almost never close.
Mm-hmm.
So we made sure that even though we have a lot of the terrain that was in this particular battle, we modified it such that there are these ridge lines that the Russians will roll over, but everything behind the ridge line will be out of sight unless the Germans are willing to come forward and use their long guns forward, which they didn't do.
I thought it was good. I thought it was a good mix of hills and wheat fields. Roads were a nice addition for some of those vehicles that could really make use of it. So let's see. Ryan, looks like Tom's starting to get set up.
Right. Now, one of the things that you can see on the bottom of the screen, as Ryan's pointing things out, is that there are Soviet objectives on this side. There are also German objectives on the other side of the table, but they're hidden by some of the pieces of terrain.
Yeah. So we'll see how the Germans set up. Really, they kind of deploy. Well, I didn't really do like a model count, but when it gets going, it looks like a pretty good concentration of armor on the left. And I think that's why, as we get going here, we'll start to see the difficulties of charging into Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs. Ryan did a really good job of using all of that terrain on his bottom left corner. Those hills and the buildings. He had, he deploys in a way, you see here once he moves to the side, where I couldn't sit in the wheat field and shoot at him. Everything was either behind a hill or behind a house. So he wasn't going to give me any opportunity. And then he makes really good use of the Panzer IVs that are in the platoons to smoke my tanks, just in case he fails his blitz and can't get out of the way. He will at least be obscuring me if I try to stay still. Really good tactics.
Right, so I was supplying the model, so each Panzer IV platoon had a short barrel in addition to the regular long barrels. And Ryan knew how to use those well. Tom is a new player, and so one, he didn't have as many of those, and two, he's not familiar with using them. So it's perhaps not a good idea for a new player to be introduced to smoke, simply because you have to know how to use it, and then in the turn sequence you have to remember to remove them. And it's just another thing that it may or may not help them, but it adds some complexity that perhaps you don't want to introduce a new player to. So
agreed. Well, here we start to see Russian movement, turn 1. I'm starting to swing the leftmost T-34 group around those hills and around the village. Armored cars move up and tuck in behind the buildings, and the KVs and the other T-34 group in the wheat field are just going to roll forward. Nick in the middle rolls his Valentines up the road and has a group of T-34s on either side. That hill in the middle, I think, is tall enough that the T-34s and the Valentines coming up the middle are completely obscured. And then he's got some kind of lower hills on the right side with his other T-34 group in the middle. Jeffrey's got his T-70s just rolling up the road, making full use of that, and then he's moving up his T-34s. This is a shot of my ending movement. Those hills, from my side of the board, I didn't quite get down to model eye level to see that the hills that those Panzer IIIs are behind are not quite tall enough to obscure my T-34s, and are going to give excellent cover to his Panzer IIIs as I try to close in on
right.
them.
Well, one of the things with these kinds of wheat fields made from doormats is that it raises up your tank. So when you talk about what you see is what you get, you need to talk with your opponent that they're actually a little bit lower. So if you do line of sight check, they're going to have to modify what they're seeing with that in mind.
Yeah. Here's a view of Nick's tanks rolling up the center.
Nick did a good job of keeping everybody online, even on the road where you could be tempted to run them longer. This is a view from Jeffrey's corner,
Yeah.
and you can see the T-70s on the road. One of his companies on the left going forward, paralleling them, and then his third company also got on the road.
Mm-hmm. Should be rolling into Russian first turn move. Looks like I get one shot, maybe at a Panzer III that's next to that house, but
yeah, almost no shots on turn one
no
for the
shots.
Russians.
Long range, concealed, and moving. It was really difficult to get good shots, and with his use of smoke, many times I was not sitting and shooting, I was moving and shooting, which is just a rough way to go with Soviet tanks in the overworked role.
Well, the way to get the feel of this battle, though, is that the Russians just have to push hard and fast.
Yeah.
And just disregard losses. And until you start using the tank wave rule and the tank graveyard, you have a hard sense of understanding that you actually have more tanks behind you because you don't simply see them on the table.
Yep, that's true. And we'll see later, I think the Russians wait a little bit too long to pull in those waves to really make good use of the overwhelming numbers that you can't really see on the table at the moment because you're recycling your companies, but you do have access to.
Yeah, basically the Germans have the advantage of interior lines from the standpoint that they're on the back edge of the board. They don't have to maneuver or close if they don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
And although Tom is now moving forward to get some shots, Ryan is playing it careful behind the hills on the left side.
He's actually making, I think, all of his blitz rolls, or many of them, and those hills that he deployed behind, he's now able to pop up for shots and then attempt a second move in order to get back down behind cover.
The shoot and scoop.
Yeah.
Yep. So the newer players are less familiar with the special movement rules, and so although we informed them about them, if they didn't use them, we didn't really push them to employ them very much.
Yeah. See how the shooting goes.
And Ryan is helping Tom line up the shots and determine line of sight. It's good to have an experienced player on both sides of the table.
Right.
When you have some new players involved, that way, one, it's more of a fair fight, and two, you can more easily coach somebody who's right beside you versus across the table.
Yeah. So it looks like movement's done, and they're just getting ready to think about what they're going to start shooting at. So you won't quite be able to see this as it goes because Ryan is blocking such a huge amount of the bottom left of the screen, but we'll start to see some rec markers pop up here. I think the group on the left that is behind the hill, as I tried to come around the hill, he has his Panzer IIIs and he's moved some to get some shots. I really do okay. He does make several hits, but I make some saves, and I think I get out of his shooting phase with one bailed T-34. But I think the group that is in the wheat field, he doesn't shoot at the KBs because he can't really do anything at them, at range. But I think you'll see here in a second, he knocks out a T-34, bails another one. And I think that armored car that is next to the house on the road, the only one that's not hiding behind a building, it also gets bailed out from a failed firepower check on his part. And then in the center, Nick doesn't really take a lot of shots or fire this round. So we'll see some destroyed markers pop up here on both flanks. One for some of my T-34s, and I think Jeffrey's, you can see right there, he's getting 3 hits on his T-70s, which really do not have the armor to take those hits. 2 of them right there go down, and think that might be it for most of his stuff. We'll see here in a second. There you can see Ryan in the bottom left. After bailing one tank out, uses his smoke to make sure that I can't just sit and return fire, which is a good tactic. Although technically, I guess, his tanks are concealed behind that hill, so the smoke isn't really further concealing them. I probably could have, but really, with that many tanks, getting sight lines from those positions, probably 4 tanks at most are going to get shots. So I'm going to end up moving around that hill anyway. I'm thinking I want to try and get into that side armor. But as we'll see, we are rolling for reserves on the Russian side.
Yes, got immediate reserves.
What did we have for reserves?
What you had were 4 guard KD-1s, 2 SU-152s, and 3 guards Churchill heavy tanks.
Right, which all those come on, and it was up to us to determine the order in which we, what units we would bring on as reserves if we were successful in our first reserve roll. But the Germans have prescribed reinforcements.
Yeah, they had a schedule of reinforcements.
Yeah.
Mostly they had 2 platoons of Stugs. The first thing to come on were the Stugs. The second one were the Martyrs. The Tiger could come on as the 3rd reserve, then another group of Stugs later. The Sturmgeschütz are very powerful at this point compared to everybody else on the board in the medium tank category.
Yeah, front armor 7, AT-11.
Yep.
Right, very good.
The other thing is that as the Russian player, I wouldn't worry about the smoke until you're close in, because what you're planning on doing, you should be rolling past that.
Yeah.
You shoot so poorly at the front that unless you're getting flank shots on the Germans, you might as well just use special movement orders, follow me, to try to keep moving forward until you're past them. That's what I was trying to coach Jeffrey to do, but his tanks were just deployed and on the road and so on in such a way that he had to move a lot before he would get up on Nick.
Yeah.
Nick did finally start to pull forward. He was trying to hide behind the hills initially. Ryan wanted him to go up and make sure there was not a hole there that Nick would punch through and get between them. So that's some of the coaching that's going on. The Germans having better radios is kind of represented by Ryan talking and coaching Tom a lot.
Yeah.
The Russian players did communicate somewhat, but they were simply because they had so much to do. They acted more like they would in real life, which is...
Well, I told them to just roll forward as well, which is the Russian way, right?
Right. So there we have
yeah.
Nick trying to go through how far he can move and where he'll end up. Again, another learning curve for new players. If you want to get the most out of this battle, try to get the new players in a short session before you bring them into such a big game. But sometimes you just have walk-ins and...
Right. Well, this is an event where people can sign up for games having never played it, and so it's kind of it's like an event/demo game kind of.
Which is
experience.
why I made sure we just had tanks on the board, except for the one airplane.
Yeah. And you can see here Ryan has succeeded in his blitzing down. Looks like 6 tanks. It looks like 2 groups. I'll get my Sturmovik in, and he's got them bunched up there. They're behind the hill, so I'm going to make sure that it comes in and drops a bombardment on as many tanks as I can fit into the template.
So for that Sturmovik, did you take the Warrior card?
I did. It's a 9-point card. So that Sturmovik there represents 17 points. No. Yeah, 16 points, because the Sturmovik is 7 points, and then the card's 9, so
we'll get to
it's
see
expensive.
We'll get to see what he does.
Yeah. So you can see I'm moving. I didn't bail back in that T-34 on the left that got bailed the last round. I'm going to make some use of the hill on my side, might as well, and try 2 tanks to swing around and get shots at that Panzer III that's next to the house behind the 4 tanks. And KVs just roll up. I've got 3 destroyed T-34s in the wheat field. I'm going to shift the armored cars around, might as well. They're not really doing anything, so if I can get extra shots. Nick just rolls over the hills and just exactly what I told him to do, just roll forward and crash into the German lines.
Right, so at this point for Nick, having some of the tanks on the hills when he does have an opportunity to shoot means that the German tanks in the wheat field can't take advantage of cover because higher ground negates that short terrain.
Yeah. Did he realize that? Did he make use of that? I don't know if he did.
I told him about it, but I wasn't involved in his part of the shooting.
Okay. We see Jeffrey rolling up with more T-70s, his T-34 group way back on the road, and then they're pushing up through the village, the rightmost T-34 group, and that lighter T-34 is the company commander?
Yeah.
Or battalion commander? And here's a view from Tom's side. He's got two groups of three Panzer IIIs just to face down Jeffrey's oncoming armor. Here we see the template's going to drop on those guys, and I'm going to come away with just a single tank destroyed.
Right, so the reason Ryan was able to concentrate so much on you is he pulled in Tom's headquarters and one of the Panzer IV companies to hit on the flank of Nick's oncoming tanks.
Yeah.
That took some of the pressure off of him. So in a rework of the mission, we're going to have the Germans have to deploy and protect objectives closer to the center of the board early on. And that one will mean that the engagements will happen sooner.
Right.
Two, that the Russians at least get some victory points no matter what happens, because they'll eventually take those. And three is that the Germans have a motivation to defend forward, because though that center hill line would be where Joachim Peiper's Panzer Grenadiers would have been overrun by the tanks in the historical battle.
Ah. Well, we can assume that Nick just did that.
Yep.
So you see on the left, I really didn't get any successful shots. We've got one Panzer III destroyed that were hiding behind the hill from the Sturmovik, but other than that, nothing. And we roll into the Russian turn. He's bringing in...
Before we do that, Ryan just brought in the Martyrs on
the
left corner as a reserve.
That was the reserve. Now, they're not going to go there in that left corner. They're going to be deployed over to Tom's side, which I think was good, because with just those three groups on that far side, I think without the Martyrs, he probably would have been overrun by Jeffrey. But it was a random deployment, so they ended up going over there.
Right.
But I think it was a good benefit.
Right. So what I did to modify the scattered reserves is I took the table corners off of that rule, made it a modified scattered reserve, so that everybody see the blue tape there. There's 3 sectors. No matter what the table size is on the long table edge, and you randomly roll for it coming in on those edges, not the corners. Which probably saved you a lot.
Well, we'll see. They got another reserve, and that was Stuggs. So at least they couldn't come in directly behind my entire T-34 group on the left there, but they will get side shots, and those T-34s can basically, kiss their rears goodbye at this point. They're flanked. He's brought armor up over the hill, and is really going to be able to focus in on that first T-34 group, and they are not going to last.
So Ryan's kind of an expert on the German tanks, because that's what he loves to run. You were a convert to the Russian side, so converting from the American rifle, American tank approach of being careful whenever you face German tanks and try to get overwhelming numbers. Well, the overwhelming numbers part you have, but the Russian mentality of rush forward and just take the hits is kind of hard to convert to. So it's understandable that everybody except for Jeffrey, who I was driving with a whip over there, they get up into firing range and then they slow down and take shots.
Yeah.
Which is, it would be a natural reaction for a tanker anyway.
Yeah.
And so their commanders, the Russian commanders, would still have to drive their guys forward to get them to do that.
Yeah. There goes those 2 tanks, and we'll see the same group will take more hits. Yeah, I would have sat and just fired had those guys really survived this round of shooting, but we'll see here in a second that they really don't. There goes another one, and
Okay, so here's a good time to talk about the tank wave rule. And that is when the Soviet tank company is down to less than 3 operational tanks, whether there's 2 bailed or however you come to that. Without getting into all the mechanics of it, you take the tanks that are destroyed, replace them with wreck markers. You take those models off the table, and once you have your company of models, and you're down to less than 3 operational tanks,
Right.
you bring that new company forward as a replacement tank company.
Yeah.
There were 5 tank brigades that we know of in this part of the battle on this day.
Yeah, I
there
could
may
have
have
used
been
that
more.
rule on my very next turn here, as I've got 1 bailed or at least 1 bailed. I can't remember if those 2 in between those 2 smoke markers are operational or they're bailed. But yeah, I could have used that wave rule here, which would have been a good way to use it rather than trying to, well, the way the rule worked, that any operational tanks had to bail out. So I guess I was thinking, I want to shoot. I don't want to have to try and roll guys forward and wave, but that's the only way the Russians are going to be able to overwhelm
Yeah,
the
I
German
might
side.
change that so that they'll still keep fighting as their brethren come up. The other thing is that'll get the Germans to keep shooting at them.
I see Nick in the middle is taking some casualties as his tanks have come up over the hill to engage in the wheat field. And I think I've got more burning tanks in the wheat field. The KVs, of course, aren't getting touched at this point. And Jeffrey's looking pretty good. He's got 4 destroyed vehicles.
Yeah. So Nick did a good thing by putting his Valentines on the road because they're the slowest of his group of tanks.
Yeah, he had good deployment that way.
The one problem with being on the road, as you see on Jeffrey's side, is that once you have wrecks on the road, now it counts like terrain.
Right.
And
Slows you down.
It slows you down. So if I were to advise somebody going forward, leave the road open for your reserves to come up. Go cross country, stay off the road so you don't get tanks destroyed there, and then you can use the road later to bring your replacement tank companies up pretty much unmolested.
So as Ryan sits down, and we can see, I think that's 5 bailed markers on that T-34 group. I don't think he's really fired. He focused on that group rather than the Valentines.
He's pulling everybody back.
Yeah, well, he's going through his blitz moves or his shoot scoots here to get back into cover. Yeah, the group that had that were top of the middle hill there took shots of that T-34 group, and he's covered himself with smoke. And I think Nick will have a tough time, or has a tough time here in a bit, getting those T-34s back in. They're trying to hop back in on a 4-up, so it's 50-50 proposition. Jeffrey in his movement phase now, this is our 3rd turn, start of the 3rd turn, is just moving straight into those Panzer IIIs. And we'll see, starts to really work that flank.
Right, so you want to be very flexible when new players are there, but you also have to watch them, because if you allow them to reposition their tanks, you have to be sure that you knew where they came from the first time.
Yeah.
So that, 1, there's no sense of cheating, and number 2 is if they do mismeasure, you can make the small corrections necessary to keep everything the way it's supposed to be. But otherwise, let them try some things out, kind of like you would let them move a piece in chess and then put it back in place.
Right.
Because they need to see visually how it's going to end up. And so Jeffrey initially put everything on the small hill there where the Panzer IIIs are at the far right, but decided that being down below the hill might be better for him.
Oh, for concealment.
For some concealment, and get what he can. The T-70s are making a bold move cross country.
Yep.
Because now they need to make room for the T-34s to use the road and creep along the flank.
Yeah, we're going to see Nick and Jeffrey really start to pincer that group of panzers in that central wheat field. But as you can see in the movement phase, those T-34s up on the hill have not bailed back in their tanks. And then on the back of the board, we can see the Churchills have come on as reserves. And on the right hand side, over by Jeffrey, the upper right, we have two Su-152s that have, I think they came on this turn. Did they come on this turn or last turn? I can't remember. But he's going to start using them to bombard those martyrs.
Yeah.
Here's a shot of the. Yeah, we got two operational tanks. So I guess I could have used the wave, but we'll try and get some shots with the T-34s that are in place, and at least they have cover in the form of their burning comrades. And then the T-34s on the road, there's not very many of them up in the fight at the moment. The KVs roll forward, and then we have a shot of Jeffrey really ready to just start throwing everything he's got into that side of the battlefield against those panzers. Looks like they're making armor saves, and this isn't armor saves. This is German turn 3. Ryan's moved out of the village completely, and he is moving up on top of the hill in the middle to get shots. Nick has the T-34s pushing past the smoke, and Ryan's going to start taking shots at the remaining other group of those T-34s on my side of the board. A lot of bailed out Valentines in the middle, and looks like Tom's group in the middle wheat field they're not doing that bad at this point.
No, but they've split their focus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he turned them to kind of face the Valentines that were coming his way, as they had dispatched a few of those T-34s that had rolled over the hill.
Yep.
I guess he wasn't fearing the T-60 or T-70s.
Wait till they get on his flank. Yeah, the T-70 is kind of deceptive in that it looks like it just has a pop gun, but it does have AT-7,
yep,
range 20. It's not a bad tank, but just like all the other ones, it has overwork. So use them. They don't even have a scout or spearhead, even though they're a light tank. So the Russian light tanks are not as fast as you think that they ought to be, but from the standpoint of the Valentines, Nick doesn't have to worry about whether he's turned front or flank, because the armor on the early Valentines is 6 and 6.
They were kind of a perfect unit to charge up that middle road, because they can be in the middle and not even worry about being flanked, like you're saying.
Yep.
Now see, Tom must have knocked out even more of Jeffrey's T-70s, as we got a couple more smoke markers over on that side of the table.
The battle is really heating up in the center, though.
Yeah.
And so Tom is having to go in there and help out Ryan, just from the sheer numbers. There's just too many targets coming in there.
We got two Valentines that brew up in the middtle.
Yeah, after a while with the smoke markers, it all starts to blend together. It's kind of hard to see how many there are. Our smoke markers, our rec markers, ended up being a little bit too large for what they're supposed to represent. So in the future, we're going to make some smaller ones. But as far as effect goes, it does really look like burning wrecks on the battlefield.
Yeah, I liked it. It was great. Unfortunately, now with the Germans moving up and some of the getting really close fighting here, the tank graveyard rule, since it's being a modified version of the mistaken target rule, if you're within 8 inches, you will not be able to use that. So we're in this knife fight. We're starting to get into this kind of close.
So it helps the ones coming in, but the ones that are in close really can't take advantage of it, which is fair, because I didn't want to modify the mistaken target rule too much. It's difficult for some people to get used to and apply, and adding any more complexity to it would have slowed things down. I just wanted to add
some flavor.
Some flavor to it.
Agreed. I think it was good. I am a little bit regretful that I didn't use it to its full effect.
Right. So on the right, Jeffrey has 3 remaining T-70s out there just around the wheat field in front of the building. But Tom has to concentrate all of his efforts on the T-34s. And with each of the T-34 companies, I gave them the command card that has the T-34-57.
Yes.
So there's 3 tanks, and Jeffrey's managed to put 2 of them down near the buildings there, where he can start taking sniper shots at Tom up on the hill, which is part of what he's trying to do. I coached him, and he put them in a good position down there.
Yeah.
We will see the effect of that.
Yeah. Another thing we're going to see, I don't know if it happened this turn in the Russian shooting step, but we also start to focus on the martyrs. They're off screen, so it's going to be hard to see when they get hit, but he's targeting them because they are a pretty big threat with that AT-12, and he is dropping bombardment from those 152s on them.
Yeah, and the 152s, they have the range, they have the line of sight, and they did get all the martyrs under the template because, 1, Tom and Ryan weren't expecting that, and number 2, when you have a lot of things to consider, even if you see that there's a threat, you might forget about it at the time that it comes to move or shoot.
Right. So it looks like I've got more bailed out tanks. They really hit us hard this turn, as you can see, all of those smoke markers popping up. It looks like we've got one more German tank in the middle behind the hill that was hit.
Right, and on the right side, Jeffrey's bringing on a replacement tank company. Now, in the original rules, they start from the back edge of the table, in other words, your deployment zone. But going forward, I'm going to have them anchored to the last remaining tank of that company.
Yeah.
And they'll start their movement. They will appear on the table, as far as the Germans know, within 20 inches of that last tank.
Right.
That one will give the more of an impression of the waves. Number 2, it'll have the Russian tanks coming in closer together.
Yeah.
And number 3, it'll get them in the action fairly quick.
Yeah.
So what we wanted to do is have a continuous rolling contact of Russian tank after Russian tank.
Yeah.
I have them start way back there. It gives the Germans a break and even a breather.
So top of turn 4, Russian movement. I've waved my destroyed, I think far left, the first group that got destroyed. They're coming up the road behind the Churchills that came on reserve, and in the middle, Nick has KVs coming up down the middle road as well.
Jeffrey's managed to take his remaining 3 T-70s out of his original 10, I believe, and they're in the wheat field mixing up with the Panzer IVs on the flanks.
Yep.
The 2 that you see are the headquarters section, and then the other 3 are also Panzer IV long guns. And he's managed to get on the flank of at least the headquarters and of some of the, he's got at least 1 tank on the flank of the platoon.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the AT-7 gun and the T-70s will come in handy.
I think this turn, I can't remember, I didn't see it pop up on the martyrs. I did send Sturmovik over there to make sure that those things went down as quick as possible.
Yeah, so I think on the first bombardment hit, he lost 1 and bailed 1.
Mm-hmm.
And then when your Sturmovik came in, it actually took out another one.
Mm-hmm.
He had 1 remaining, but it turns out, typical German platoon, it's very durable even down to the last tank.
Right. But we've got 2 Panzer IIIs burning from, looks like probably combined fire from the Valentines and the T-70s, and the remaining T-34s that are next to those 3 smoke markers in the wheat field in the middle. So we're starting to make some good progress on the right flank, on the bottom right of the screen. Not so much on the other side, the bottom left. The KVs are forward. They're pretty close to that objective. They've got Panzer IIIs behind them, well, really all around them.
And you can see that Ryan's getting hot and nervous there.
Yeah, it's really, the pressure's on him, obviously. But I think he's going to be fine here, as we have the next reinforcement coming up for the Germans on their turn. is the Tiger makes an appearance.
Right. So one of the things we're going to change in this scenario is that the Germans got reinforcements, and they're so close right now to their own line
That's true.
that those reinforcements hit the Russians immediately.
Immediately, yeah.
So
It's a boon. It's a pretty good bonus.
whereas in reality, the Germans had their reinforcements come, throughout the day, and it was a running battle for the entire day, I mean, from sun up to sundown. So to represent that a little bit better going forward, we're going to have the Germans have delayed reserves. Since the Russians have so far to move with their reserves, and I'll leave the reserves on the Russians coming from the back edge, but the replacement companies will be anchored to the last dead tank or failed tank of that company. So right now, the count on the martyrs is about 2 dead, 1 bailed, and 1 live, even though it's off screen.
Yeah. This looks like it must be end of Russian shooting, probably rolling into
Right. So
beginning
the
of
strange
June
thing with the
24.
blue plume on that upper right corner is actually Jeffrey's camera with a little tripod.
Right.
It's not any models of ours.
We were really tight for space. Here comes the Tiger, and there's a lot of stuff on the table. Ideally we would have some space for sideboard where we could set stuff and it wouldn't be so cluttered. But we had to make do with the space that we had.
Yeah, there were a lot of other games going on that day. I think there were 5
Beautiful
other ones.
Napoleonic game that looks like they're taking down at the moment, but there's just beautiful 20 millimeter Napoleonic models behind us.
Yeah. It was really something to see all those gamers. There was an Aztec table in the upper right-hand corner of the screen that you could see. That was just gorgeous. Have no idea how it played, but it was a good bit of eye candy.
So it looks like Ryan's getting into his movement, and he is, I think, just going to roll up with his Tiger, shoot at the KVs, obviously, but he's swinging the Panzer III groups and the Panzer IVs that he has towards the Valentines and the T-34s of Nick's battalion. And he's pretty much... he knocked out the 2 remaining bailed tanks of that group that is coming on up the road. They were still alive, they were bailed out in that position, but he looks like he devoted, I think those are Stugs, to knock them out. So they're replaced with destroyed markers. And I made the call that those, having been destroyed after the wave came in, did not get placed behind the tanks coming up the road.
Okay.
And looks like he's doing some shooting at the T-34 group. Oh no, the KVs right there. So I think I got off light. It was 1 or 2 bailed KVs, no destroyed. So with a Tiger in front of him, I'll take that. But he's continuing to shoot at my T-34s on the road, and we'll be whittling them down.
Yeah, I spent a lot of my time off screen coaching Jeffrey. Nick was fairly confident about using his tanks and what to do. Jeffrey is actually a sometimes Team Yankee player, but these distances and the movement rates are very, very different from Team Yankee. So
Right.
I was spending some time helping him adjust and getting him in the mindset of
It looks like he's taken several shots on his T-34s that he's trying to make saves there for. And it looks like 1 was destroyed, 1 bailed, and
yeah, a lot of burning wrecks on that side.
yeah. Now the Tom's Panzer IIIs, those 2 groups of Panzer IIIs, they're doing pretty good. they have no destroyed tanks, even though it is the weaker flank.
Yeah, looking at it now, it's easy to do something different in hindsight, but that Jeffrey's tanks should have just kept going until they were past his flanks. And later on, Jeffrey does kind of get the Russian vibe, and there's an open path to the objective. I guess I should take that. But sitting there dueling front to front with German tanks, as a Russian player, you're just not going to win that.
Yeah.
You need to get past them, get on their flanks, get them to start turning around and breaking that frontal phalanx, basically, that they can do, and break up their coordination such that it's more like a individual tank battle. And you're still not going to win that one-on-one, but you're going to get more flank shots, and then you can sit there and shoot, because whichever way you turn your turret, you're going to get a flank shot. But right now they're just lined up face to face.
So at this point, it looks like our two Nick and Tom are going to step away from the table. They were signed up for other games, so I am going to be continuing on with Jeffrey. I'll take over Nick's tanks, and Ryan will be the sole German commander for this last.
So this kind of slows down the gameplay, because now you have Ryan controlling 3 companies plus reserves.
I think we did 5 or 6 turns.
I think so.
Large games, they just take time. It's not like playing a normal 6x4 table.
And everybody had to do a reach to get to the middle of the board.
I am getting those T-34s that were bailed out for Nick back in. I think I failed one, but I got most of them all in, and then coming over to my tanks on my side of the table, I think I got the KVs back in.
Right.
I didn't get a few Valentines, though, in the middle. I think I got 2 of them. There were 4 total bailed out behind all that smoke, and 2 of them remained bailed, and 2 of them got back in. But that put us in a fairly good position for getting those T-34s and Valentines back in the center.
Right. Now,
and the Sturmovik comes in. I got air support, and I put it on the Tiger. I'm gonna test the commander card.
Of course, Ryan's staying close to the Sturmovik because he wants to put some bad juju on it.
Oh, he is notorious for that.
He's a witch.
Yes, he as you're rolling your armor save, he says, just roll a 1, and I don't know how many times it has popped up as a 1. It's remarkable. And it looks like I'm checking the range for that AT-10 of those Churchills on the Panzers that have nicely turned their side armor. And I'm going to bring up, still trying that flank, I guess, cross-country dash those T-34s around those hills. The KVs are going to roll up in the center. Those reserves for Nick. And
now, when Nick had that many T-34s bailed out, I think he might have been eligible for the tank wave and just not realized it.
Yeah, it could be. I end up starting to use it. I think it could have been, I think it would have been much better to use it. I use it for the group that's almost all burning in front of the wheat field.
Right.
As you see, I just put out all those T-34s, and we've modified the rule here, so rather than coming on from the far back, it looks like they're able to be a little bit closer to their company. They're back 24 inches. And then they're able to do a move. So it's about a turn away from being.
Now, for the whole game, the Germans never made a lunge for the Russian objectives. The objectives on the Russian side.
I could see that, though, especially with the wave rule. I mean, you might knock out a horde of Russian tanks, but if they're coming on in waves, you're going to have to continue to wade through oncoming tanks to get to an objective. So I don't blame them and it's not the only way to win, right? You had multiple ways to look at victory.
Yep.
So here looks like a view of KVs in the middle, surrounded by tanks. The oncoming T-34 on the far bottom left, and just the general chaos of the battlefield with all those ruck markers. Stugs holding the objective in the bottom left. Two KVs stay put after bailing back in to try and get shots, and one of them backs up. I think he takes a side shot at one of those Stugs on the road.
Right. Well, on your side, you're actually lining up pretty well. That now Ryan has to face 3 directions.
Yeah, he did. It was nice that they came forward. I mean, they really didn't, I guess, technically need to, but it made it a fun game with the panzers coming up more towards the middle, and kind of the battle starting to swirl like that.
Right. And over in the right center where Jeffrey is, he's taking his shots. He's still lined up face to face with the Panzer IIIs, but I think that helped him use the T-70s to full effect in the wheat field, because now you can see that there are 2 Panzer IVs burning in that 3 tank platoon, and the headquarters itself got into trouble too.
He's got him bailed out, it looks like.
Yep. So now there's a potential hole in the German lines right close to Jeffrey.
Yep.
And of course, Ryan, having to spread himself out, can't easily recognize or deal with all the threats simultaneously. So he's still more focused on his left than on the right.
Yeah. And I think by this time those martyrs are either gone, or there might be one of them still there. But I think it's bailed out, and
Hanging on by a thread.
it makes its morale check, but it remains bailed out. So they're pretty much taken out of the game. Now, did he? I don't think at this point either he was using the 152s again for bombardment, but I don't know. I can't remember if he starts to move them forward. I don't know if he does.
You'll move them forward on the next turn. Try to get them on that hill so you can have a diagonal view of the hill just in front of the Ryan's dice rolling box there.
Looks like the company commander and 2IC that were bailed out are now, we flipped them over as looks like they got destroyed.
Yep.
So yeah, you're right. Those T-70s are occupying kind of that hole right in the middle, and it looks like the bottom right is starting to see some bailed out Panzer IIIs. Yeah, I go over to kind of hoping that there'd be too much for him to realize what's going on. I advise Jeffrey to move those T-70s to the objective.
Yeah.
Just hoping. Maybe Ryan won't notice, but...
Well, whether he does or not, I mean, as a German player, he still has to react to it. And every time that some of the German tanks have to turn and deal with something that's not to their front, you have an opportunity for flank shots, and then you could pick out the ones that you really want to hit.
So here you see the Sturmovik go away. It had, I made my range in, I
bailed out the Tiger.
I hit the Tiger, he failed his armor save, and then I failed my firepower to just bail it. Doing the calculations, it's about I think 6% chance of actually killing something with top armor 2. So it's, for 16 points, I'm not sure if I think it's a good investment for taking out targets of those types.
If you want to use a psychological aspect and your opponent can be affected that way, then it still might be worth it. But you have to press it home to make sure that they worry about it.
Yeah.
And then what do you do with that advantage? Because any mental advantage is basically 1 or 2 turns and then it's gone. Mm-hmm. So if you create that advantage, you should have a plan for how you're going to use it. Mm-hmm. I do like some psychological tricks or gimmicks, but it has to be your playing style, because otherwise it doesn't do anything for you.
Right.
So now that the T-70 is over on the right, well, I'll skip that because we're at a different point in the battle.
This will pop up here. We're just looking at a shot of some T-34s that I think have waved in, and they're coming from that middle wheat field.
Okay, so now Ryan's rolling for...
I think he's blitzing. Or not blitzing, but shoot and scoot. But I don't think he made those few rolls that he was doing.
Yeah, so now almost across at least the left side of what you see here, there is opportunities for concealment behind the smoke for most of the Russian tanks. Mm-hmm. But Ryan's got one platoon up in the wheat field that's also taking advantage of some of that for his own.
Right.
And Jeffrey's rolling on his side for... It's hard to tell who's shooting and who's doing armor saves.
I think they're resolving shooting from Ryan.
And I'll see if I can get copies of some of Jeffrey's camera shots,
Yeah, that'd be great.
because he's got an angle that.
Put it on the blog.
Yeah. Now Jeffrey was playing it very cool, mostly trying to learn and have some fun at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And what he didn't realize, and perhaps now Ryan is really getting nervous about, is that formation. There were 3 formations on the German side. That formation on Ryan's right is very close to breaking.
Ah, yeah, I didn't think about that when we were playing. Is if any of these might be breaking. Of course, the Russian side, they're just coming on a wave, so I don't know if that would come into effect for
Well,
them,
I took that into consideration because you still have to do your formation check, but the way that the tank wave rule I designed it is it's interleaved with unit last stand and formation in good spirits.
Mm-hmm.
And so, or is it the other way around? And I'll explain it more on the rules and the documents that we put up on the blog. But I try to do it in such a way that you're in less danger of losing your formation, simply the way that plays out.
Yeah.
So if you're using a tank wave rule on a company, it basically skips its unit last stand.
Okay, that makes sense. So it looks like Ryan's doing some shooting on, I think, the Valentines, knocking more of them out in the
It's still
middle.
the original company. They haven't had a replacement company of the Valentines yet. They're tough.
No, I think coming on the start of probably the start of turn 5 for the Russians coming up here, I will end up bringing them on, using the wave rule to bring them on, and the other T-34 group in the center as well.
Right. So going forward, not only for the purposes of the video, but also for the players to keep on track, we're going to have a Rolodex or some other kind of visual sign marker of which turn and which part of the turn that we're on, not necessarily by phase, but if we're on the German players turn 5 or the Russian players turn 5, to keep everybody on track.
Yeah.
We did a decent job, but in a noisier environment, or if we get really busy, it would be easy for us to get out of sync, and that will cause a real mess.
So it looks like we're getting some bailed results from Ryan shooting over on the left side of the table.
Yeah, so for Ryan, once he took over from Tom, the fact that the T-34s had some long gun 57s mixed in was a nasty surprise for him.
Yeah.
So pay attention, the order of battle was available, but in the heat of the battle, a lot of times you're focusing on what you have and not so much what the enemy has.
So he's just destroyed another T-34 or 2 in the on the road on the left side of the table. So at that point, I'm already thinking, okay, I'm going to bring these guys on in a wave, as well as all of Nick's other 2 companies.
Yeah, I think if we could get some of those camera stills from some of our other friends that were playing, we could fill in some holes here
Yeah.
visually.
Look at that, just smoke everywhere, all over the table.
So what happened to your KVs over there?
They, at this point, were destroyed by the Tiger. This round of shooting, I had one that was bailed out. I think he swung his. See the Stugs in the middle, right next to the bailed out KV. There's 2 that are facing the T-34s that are coming over on the far left, and then 2 of them are getting side shots on the KV that pulled back behind the other 2 KVs. The front 2 KVs are at this point destroyed by the Tiger, and the Stugs have bailed out. The one that's still remaining, and then it looks like he's shot some smoke at it too. So
So it looks like back in the center, you're replacing two replacement tank companies. The Valentines are the Browns on close to the road, and then the other ones are the T-34s behind the wheat field here.
Yep, and I'm gonna also wave the T-34s that were behind the KVs in the wheat field.
Now, at this point, I think that game-wise, the wave rule is starting to have an effect, but time-wise, we're getting to the end of our time window for.
Yeah, we're getting pretty close.
Gameplay.
2 of our guys had to leave, and I think we're into getting close to 3-4 hours here. And we can see I'm getting a second attempt here with my Sturmovik on that Tiger. Hoping for something more than a bail.
Right, so although Ryan's got a forward platoon plus out there, mostly the Germans are pulling back and they're not exposing themselves on the hills except for in the far right.
Yeah.
Not so much because the Russians have good long-range shooting, but because he's got his hands full using the terrain in close knife fight battles.
Yeah.
And that's the style of battle that the Russians should be able to at least have an advantage on.
Yeah. It looks like Tom, here's the shot of the bailed out KV, the bailed out T-34. Here's the oncoming waves of Valentine's and Nick's other T-34 company. I was going to say, it looks like Jeffrey has moved his T-70s 4 inches from the objective in the wheat field. One of them was bailed out in a previous shooting step next to the hill and the wheat field that's just next to Ryan's right shoulder. And there's really only 2 Panzers in that wheat field operating. And then the two groups of 3 Panzers. I think one of them looks like it's been destroyed. The one on the hill is intact, and the other one in the wheat field has 2 tanks remaining. Some shooting from the Churchills on the left side claim another Panzer. I think they're turned even, so getting side shots there. And the T-34s on the left, they're just really not able to bring the volume of fire that the Russians need to really have an impact on the Panzer 3s and 4s.
Yeah, if you're going to shoot, it almost feels like you need to have 2 companies online. One moves while the other one shoots, if you can do anything at all.
Yeah.
Shooting on the move, you might as well just use that opportunity if you can to do a follow me and keep moving.
Yeah. The KVs in the middle have gotten far enough forward that they're starting to shoot, but I don't know how many. I don't think they have too many hits that are effective. Ryan's got that group of Panzers tucked in behind all those burning wrecks, getting cover.
Yeah, but it might tease his Tiger away from where you are over to the center.
Yeah.
Because those KVs are tough for anything else.
As we can see, the Sturmovik is not there anymore. The Tiger, it failed to hit. It ranged in on the second attempt, I believe, and then failed to hit the Tiger in its bombardment. Looks like we're doing Jeffrey's shooting on that side of the table at this point. Ryan's doing his armor saves. Now, on the right-hand side, if it isn't apparent already, I think this is where we had, if the game had gone longer and we had continued to play, the best chance of claiming an objective.
Right, so that right formation near where Ryan is rolling his dice right now had only 2 platoons remaining. The headquarters and its other platoon died in the wheat field, and some of the Panzer IIIs, I believe, just off screen there. One is, you can see it's turned on its side.
Yeah, it's destroyed.
That's a situation of one's destroyed, one's bailed, and one's alive.
Yeah.
They keep making their unit last stand checks,
Right.
but it's either a matter of time or else you just take out the last couple of tanks.
The group of 3 on the hill was bailed out. I'm just replacing some destroyed tanks, some destroyed Panzer with smoke markers. Kind of clean up the battlefield. Looks like we're starting the German turn. 5. He gets that Panzer III that was bailed out back in. Starting to get some Panzers on the left-hand side back in. And I can't remember at this point if he gets any more reserves. But after the Tiger comes on, does he have any other reserves that he...
He has one more Stuck platoon unless they already came on.
Did he have 2 total?
Yeah.
I think they did come on, and I think they come on they may be coming on right now, actually, on the right-hand side. So he spotted the T-70s, and he pulled back that platoon, that Panzer platoon on the hill to make sure they protected the objective.
Yeah, at this point, if Jeffrey had been pressing to get right on him with the T-34s, which he will do as soon as his movement comes up, but if he'd already had one of his companies or a couple of them in position, he would get flank shots on those.
Yeah.
Those are Panzer IVs, actually.
Oh, are they?
I think the 3s got destroyed in the wheat field. But even so, those very late Panzer IIIs are tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And if we had infantry anti-tank weapons, their bazooka skirts would give them an advantage.
Yeah.
But as I said, we just try to have only tanks and maybe airplane or 2 on this.
Yeah.
Ryan's very good at rolling high on his dice when he needs to. He can just pull it out.
Yeah.
Like he said, he's a witch with dice.
I tried his voodoo on him, and it didn't seem to work. So I don't know how he does it.
It may come from his 40K chaos demons or whatever it is.
He's sacrificed enough dice to the 40K dice gods that he has their favor.
He might have even melted some down.
Yeah. I'm not sure if that was just taken off the table at the edge of that wheat field, if that was a T-70 or if that was a T-34. Well, it looked like he did some shooting, destroyed whatever that vehicle was.
Oh, Jeffrey was tenacious over there. I mean, it's a tough switch from being any other type of player to being a Russian player.
Yeah.
And so you can't see their faces, but some of our friends also came in, dropped by to check things out.
And this will end up being the last turn of the game. We've gone quite long here. But as we can see with those companies of Russian tanks coming on in waves, I think with the Germans up in the middle of the battlefield and the tanks in a good position, I think if we had gone, 1 or 2 more turns, would have had a lot more destroyed German vehicles. But at this point, he's protected that bottom right objective. All the other objectives aren't being threatened, and we'll come down to destroyed
formations on the German side. It's almost impossible to count how many Russian tanks were destroyed because once you have the smoke markers down, you don't know whether it was a German or. I mean, you could mark them if you wanted to.
Well, here's shots of all the destroyed vehicles. I really liked the destroyed markers, not having to use your tanks and being able to use them again for a wave. So that was the Battle of Prokhorovka for Ambuscade.
Yep.
And is there any other things? What is? We've mentioned the blog a couple times, James. What's the blog?
We've got a Rose City Dukes and Duchesses blog. Post the pictures, the video, and the documents that describe the modified mission, the order of battle, our little take on the mission briefing for both sides. So
great game. Loved playing it. James, thanks for putting it together.
Yep.
And thanks guys for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.